Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a senior at Harvard, and today Professor Peterson is going to be lecturing about congressional elections. Two parts to this lecture. Part 1, incumbency advantage, and Part 2, congressional districts and campaigns. What is incumbency advantage?
Well, incumbency advantage simply means that you have an advantage if you're the person holding the office and you're asking to be reelected. And this advantage is tremendous. It's the most important asset that you have in a campaign. If you're the incumbent, you'll probably win. There's the reelection rates for the incumbents in the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. They win about 85% of the time, sometimes as high as 98% of the times, usually above 90% of the time. If an incumbent runs, the incumbent wins. Now, in the Senate, it's not quite so close. It goes up and down over the years. Of course, there's fewer senators running. Remember, there's only 100 senators. There's 435 members of the House of Representatives. So when you have, and then of the Senate seats that are up, only 1/3 come up of all Senate seats in any one election. So there's only about 33, maybe 35 Senate seats. Sometimes somebody dies in office and then that opens up a seat. So maybe there's close to 40 seats that are open in any given year. But as you can see, that produces more ups and downs just because it's the law of large numbers tends to even things out, and you don't have that in the Senate side. But you can also see here the tendency for Senate elections to be less safe for the incumbent. And that's partly because senators run in a completely different media context than do members of the House of Representatives. We're going to talk about that in our next lecture, but I'll just highlight that for now.
What is the slurge, and how does it reveal incumbency advantage?
Well, now we're talking about the House of Representatives. If you look at the House of Representatives, sophomores who are running for re-election always do better than they did in their first election. So their freshman years in office, their first 2 years in office when they're considered to be just the frosh, they know they're going to win more votes when they go back to the district the second time out, because all of a sudden they're going to be the incumbent. So when we look at how the change in their vote, we can see just how important the incumbency advantage is. And then when somebody retires and you get an open seat, there'll be a slump in support for the party. And so if you combine them together, you can see just how big is the incumbency advantage. And there's always been some incumbency advantage, but this slide shows that it opens up after 1960. Unfortunately, it doesn't bring us down to the present. It brings us only into the 80s. But that opening up has certainly remained intact down to the present time. So the retirement slump works against the party that did hold the office, and the sophomore surge works for the advantage. And together you can see how big the incumbent advantage actually is.
Why is incumbency advantage larger in congressional elections than in presidential elections?
Well, we've already talked about the fact that the incumbent president has a tremendous advantage, but it is even greater for members of the House of Representatives. Why? Well, because voters have less information about the candidates than they do in the House elections than they do in the presidential elections. A third will know the name of the challenger or of the representative, but only 10% will know how the incumbent has voted on the major issue. Meanwhile, the President of the United States, everybody knows every mistake a president has made. So if you want to get reelected, you want to be one of these folks. You don't want to be a president of the United States. Another factor out there that helps incumbents is the fact that in congressional elections, there's lower turnout, especially in the off-year elections. And they have smaller constituencies. They can work their constituencies. So there's a lot of ways in which there's just the nature of the electoral process works to the advantage of the incumbent in House elections. They're much less likely to be competitive because nobody wants to take them on, whereas there's always somebody who wants to take on the President of the United States.
What election advantages does a member of Congress have?
Well, the resources available to incumbents are pretty amazing. The decentralized committee structure in Congress allows the member to work on committees that are of interest to the constituents in the member's district, and they can pass pork barrel legislation that can be bragged about in the next election campaign. They have a staff. They have the ability to mail letters, and together all of this is worth about $1 million in campaign contributions. As many as 18 staff members for every member of Congress, and most of those people, not most of them, a significant share of them work in the district. 40% of them work in the district, not in Washington, D.C. And then they can do a lot of nonpartisan constituent service. If you have a problem, bring it to your member. And once the member helps you with that problem, you're grateful, and you'll vote for him whether he's a Democrat or a Republican. You're just grateful. And then they are able to draw district lines in such a way as to work to their advantage. Every 10 years, you have to have redistricting. We're going to talk about that later on in more detail. But when that happens, it usually works to the advantage of incumbents. And they have fundraising ability because they're already established, they're already serving on a committee, and they can go out and find the interest groups who want to influence the legislation on that committee, and no promises have to be made, but they can still raise the money.
What are the new dangers for incumbents?
Well, incumbents might have to worry more about what's happening inside their party than what's happening from the other party because of the primary election process. So the challenges are going to come from the extremes of the party because the primary electorate is totally different from the general electorate. And every member of Congress who wins is going to win a general election, and they're going to become more moderate. And they have to be in Washington. They have to get along with their party. They can't just ignore the party leadership, because if they don't, they aren't going to get other kinds of benefits that they want as a member of Congress. So you'll see in these ads just how this is exploited against somebody like Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republican Party, who's coming up for re-election. And if he survives the primary, he'll be in great shape. But will he survive the primary? That's what he's got to worry about.
The chicken, or Gallus gallus domesticus, is common domestic fowl. In American slang, the chicken represents a coward. The chicken is also representative of a new breed of Republicans in Washington. They tend to say one thing:
Obamacare should be repealed, root and branch.
But when confronted with an opportunity to act, they often run, far away, without a sense of direction. Take Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. On the issue of Obamacare, he says,
"This law is a disaster, and I want you to know we're not backing down from this fight."
But when he has the chance to defund Obamacare, some say he is chickening out. Senator McConnell, conservatives don't need a chicken when it comes to Obamacare. Leaders lead. But if you fund it, you own it.
And here's another example of another campaign that has the same characteristics. Then we'll go on to part 2.
Washington, D.C. is a partisan town. Both political parties refuse to work together. But Denny Rehberg is different. An independent thinker, Rehberg refuses to toe the party line. Rehberg opposed his party, voting against the Central American Free Trade Deal, against President Bush's Wall Street bailout, and Rehberg refused to support a Republican budget plan that could harm the Medicare program so many of Montana's seniors rely on. In a very partisan town, Denny Rehberg stands out, and that's good for Montana.